This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're checking in with RuthAnne Visnauskas, Commissioner for New York State Homes and Community Renewal, who's responsible for implementing and selling some of Governor Kathy Hochul's efforts to boost housing production as well as preservation here in the Empire State. Thanks for visiting us in the studio, Commissioner.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the state's Environmental Quality Review Act, which the governor has identified as being a deterrent to new housing, at least in some situations. Can you explain how the process of building housing might be different in the future with the language that the governor is pushing, as well as what your expectations are for how much more housing you could build in the future with the governor's language compared to the status quo?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things, right? The governor's very focused on housing supply, as she has been for a number of years now, and she has charged the agencies and her team with identifying ways to cut red tape and speed up the process of developing housing. So this really comes out of her mandate for that goal, which is very much at the center of her sort of affordability agenda for New Yorkers. So when we looked at projects that are subject to seeker, we find over and over and over again that there are no findings. And so why are we doing this process that doesn't result in any environmental impacts? When we are building in cities, we aren't finding impacts. Land is already disturbed. These are already urban places, but that's true outside of cities also. So we are excited to be sort of in this conversation this year. We're talking about sort of getting out of the way of localities who want to build housing. So for many localities, if they want to build housing, they are subject to lawsuits that can be brought by anybody for any reason that is in the SECRA process. Mm-hmm. So this is really our way of getting out of the way of localities who then can rezone and permit housing as they see fit, right? It doesn't touch any local zoning. Localities still have to have residential zoning available in order for housing to get built. But it takes and they can still do processes to make sure they're connecting to water and to sewer, and they have to do all the reviews they normally have to do for their permitting process. It just means there's not sort of another state layer. So I think one of the things we hope to see is that as we pull back that requirement that can often lead to years, and there had been some studies where there's real dollar impact in New York City. The number was like $82,000 or $85,000 a unit of additional cost. Up here, it's $35,000, $40,000 created by this process. And when those costs sort of start to go away and the time frame starts to get sped up, we would ideally see more housing getting permitted across the state, which is the goal.
But do you have an idea of what the change could actually be? Have you modeled out anything, for example?
So one of the things that we hear when we talk to developers is, and this is why it can be a little bit hard to quantify, is that they don't build in lots of places in New York City because they know there's going to be a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. So it isn't that they go and try and then there is a lawsuit, although there are examples of that.
Sure.
But over and over again, we hear people saying, like, I wouldn't even go to, and they'll name 5 or 10 towns because they'll say, we're just going to be in litigation for years. So in some ways, it's sort of like the absence of what's happening is a little hard to quantify because it's just not happening.
Is there a reason why we're having this conversation just in the context of housing when it comes to seeker? Because the framing has been that this is kind of redundant, that there is no added value from the seeker process. So why not just get rid of it altogether or go even more aggressive with the types of projects that would basically be allowed to circumvent this?
So it does apply more broadly than housing. It applies to child care facilities. It applies to infrastructure. So it isn't
sure,
just...
but you're still picking and choosing, though.
Look, I would say that we would be really excited as we are sort of each year when we come back with different things in the governor's state of the state and in the budget process to sort of keep moving the ball down the field. I think if we are successful here, I wouldn't doubt that there could be a proposal that comes back in a different year that applies it more broadly. I think we're going to fight the fight this year to get it approved and live to fight another day.
Well, as State Senator Rachel May highlighted during your budget testimony, they have their own version of this, which is, I'd say, more descriptive in terms of what they want to allow based on, say, the size of a community. That is not necessarily the approach you guys are taking. You have more of a broader approach, New York City versus the rest of the state. Why that approach, and why not the more tailored approach that the legislature was favoring? I say favoring. The bill wasn't passed. It was out there.
Yeah, I would say, and Senator May has been a great champion here, and certainly is a great, friend of housing and of affordable housing. So really enjoy working with her and her team. I think the governor feels very strongly that this should apply statewide and shouldn't be picking and choosing areas of the state. We launched 2 years ago now a pro-housing communities program, right, where we are providing resources to pro-housing communities across the state. We have 400 and something approved already. if you look at the map, there'd be a bunch of pro-housing communities that would be excluded when you compared it to Senator May's bill. So I think it's sort of mixed messaging to say to places, we really want you to be in our pro-housing community program. We're going to support you with your housing efforts, but in fact, when it comes to SECRA, you're not included. So I think the governor has just a broader approach than Senator May's bill in ensuring that this gets approved everywhere in the state where residential housing can get built.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with RuthAnne Visnauskas, Commissioner for New York State Homes and Community Renewal. Well, let's stick with the great state senator, Rachel May. One of the things she also talked about, as well as some of her colleagues, is the state's Housing Acceleration Fund, at $215 million, and I'm using the HCR language here, first of its kind program to speed up construction of shovel-ready mixed-income residential projects across New York State. And this was, I think, announced back in the fall of 2025. Where do things stand with that now, and what are your expectations here?
So we were really excited about the program as the, affordable housing agency for the state. We had sort of historically really been focused on somewhat maybe myopically on our production. We have, under the governor's leadership, really expanded our purview of how we think about housing across the state, and we think about it much broader than just affordable housing and much broader than just 100% affordable housing. So this mixed income construction loan product was meant to help stalled mixed income projects around the state that, because of interest rates, because of tariffs, because market rents aren't that strong, for whatever reason, are not penciling out, because equity rates are really high, and to provide a low-cost source of debt for those projects to get built. So we're really excited to be in that space. It's not something we have done historically, so it's new for us, but we love it. And we have signed up a couple of lenders. We're working primarily with CDFIs, who are going to be the sort of our lending partners in this. It's construction-only funding, so it will revolve. We just at the beginning of the year finished sort of all signing up all of our documents with those lenders, and they are now taking in projects. It takes 6 or 9 months for a project to go from sort of initial underwriting to actually closing, but we would expect in the course of this year to get a lot of that money out the door.
And in terms of that $215 million, is this something where as it gets paid back, you can then reinvest it elsewhere, or is this something where you're looking to then in the future get additional dollars from the budget to invest?
Yes on all. I think that it definitely will revolve. So projects take about 2 years to get built, sometimes 3, depending on how big and where they are in the state. But we would expect the construction loans would come back within 2 to 3 years, and then we would recycle those into new deals. There is some additional funding that came in one of the One House bills. So if there's additional funding provided, we will just get that money out on the street as quickly as we can.
Very diplomatic answer. So coming into this legislative session, one of the things that I think landlords were hoping would be a bigger part of the conversation was some sort of effort to remove what they see as disincentives to spend money on bringing back apartments that for whatever reason are not available to rent. Is that conversation happening at all? Is there anything in the budget you think that is going to address these concerns? And if not, how come?
So we definitely see landlords across the state, building owners across the state have, whether it's rising insurance costs, rising utility costs, people not paying their rents, rents being flat in the case of sort of what's people are expecting in the city of New York. There's a lot of pressure on the housing stock. The housing stock in New York State is very old. The housing stock in New York City is very old. So we see that pressure and have responded. I think some of the things you see in the budget this year, there is a series of insurance reforms. Insurance could be a little dry to talk about. But
residential insurance is a great issue, and we're excitedly waiting whatever the Senate Democrats come up with on that area. But it does seem the policies that you're advancing on this are much more in the margins compared to the big swing that theoretically the legislature is going to come out with. Again, who knows if they ever move any of it, though.
Yeah, I would say we focused this year on ways to cut expenses for building owners. So that's sort of what's embodied in a lot of the insurance work that's there. I do think that and I think, the city administration is getting settled. It's only been 75 days or whatever they've been there.
And they still haven't solved all the problems yet. I got a lot of questions of this new mayor.
So I think that we will, in partnership, I think the legislature in partnership with the city and the governor will be looking, I would imagine, towards next year to the extent that there are changes made to the rent stabilization system to modify some of the sort of different pieces in there that would help provide some relief to landlords.
Well, an ongoing thing right now is the implementation of a pilot program, the state launching its housing access voucher program. Can you explain what's happening outside of New York City?
Sure. So we split the vouchers. New York City, they're being administered by the city's housing agency, and outside New York City, by HCR at the state. And we're working with a series of local administrators who are actually on the ground and who are working with residents that have vouchers. They're getting referrals from the county social service entities. So we have about maybe 1,000 vouchers that will get placed in the rest of state. We have issued about, 40% of our vouchers. We should get them all issued, meaning people have it in their hand and they're out looking for an apartment. We will likely be fully issued and people will be fully sort of have those apartments, those vouchers attached to apartments probably within about 6 months. So within the course of this year, we will be sort of fully utilized with our portion of the voucher program.
And this is a pilot program, so theoretically you're assessing this and determining whether it works and whether lawmakers who have been beating the drum for a $250 million investment are making a strong argument. So how are you going to assess whether something like this is working?
Yeah, it's certainly hard. I think that, to your point about the pilot, you could also call it HAVPP if you wanted to add pilot onto the end of the program.
Thanks for the idea.
You're welcome. We have $50 million in the budget last year. There's $50 million in the budget this year. It is hard with something like a pilot to see results super fast, right? If we have people placed in 6 months, that is great. It's sort of still hard to size the need and to know where to go from there. I think what I would say, and this is played out in the city to the extent that you follow some of the city FEPS voucher conversation, which
Let's
is
pretend I do.
very much at the center of the city budget conversation right now, which is that vouchers are important, but they are only one piece of the puzzle, and we can't voucher our way sort of out of the homelessness and out of the stress in the housing market. We need to be building more supply. So I think that HAVP will be part of the conversation in the budget this year. As I said, we have $50 million from last year's budget. There's $50 million in this year. Like, it is funded, and we have money to keep going through the course of the pilot. But we also want to stay really laser focused and have front and center our supply agenda.
But at the end of the day, this is still a pilot program. So are there any questions, though, to be answered about something like this? Is there any reason to think that the idea of giving money to people to pay for their rent is not going to work, or that there's something that would say that this is not a good use of money?
Look, I would say that the topic of poverty is a complex one, whether you're talking about housing or health or food, or, people talk a lot about just cash assistance, and do we have to keep putting things in silos? Can't we just give people more money? There's a big conversation in the city right now about raising the minimum wage. So I think that, you can attack it from multiple sides, whether it's vouchers or there is just sort of a poverty issue, and that people don't make enough to cover basic things, whether it's housing or food or healthcare. And that's sort of a complex issue that I think people are always struggling to solve.
During your budget testimony, you talked about land banks and noted that we've seen an increase in the state from 31 to 32 recently, and noted that there's ultimately a cap in law on land banks, and you're looking to raise that up from 35 to 45. What do you see as the role of land banks in the governor's broader housing goals? And is there anything else that we could be doing to either increase their capacity or just grow the number of land banks beyond what we're seeing, I guess, kind of organically?
We love working with land banks at HCR. And I think maybe when I was here last time, we probably talked about Move in New York, which is our program that we are running specifically with land banks around the state, where we are placing these factory-built houses on lots, the little cute houses, 1,500 square feet. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, in case you're in the market for a home.
I'm okay for now.
They're really cute. There's one in Schenectady, there's one in Syracuse, and there's one in the town of Newcomb right now. And now we're launching, and we're going to do 200 more this year. That work has been very much in partnership with land banks who have struggled with, take whether it's Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, pick your land bank. They are operating in places where it costs $300,000 or $400,000 to build a house, and the market value of the house is $185,000 or $210,000. So it's very upside down. It's why the lots are sitting there for a lot of these land banks and don't get built, because it needs an enormous amount of public subsidy to get the house built to then get it occupied again. So we were really excited to launch our Move in New York initiative, because the houses get built for about $250,000. So the gap is so much smaller. So we're really excited. We have, I think, 17 different localities that we're working with, and most of, if not all of those, are land bank related. And so we think they're really sort of front and center for us in revitalization of not just sort of cities like Albany and Rochester, but also in rural and suburban areas too, of getting more housing built that's cheaper, getting people access to homes, making people first-time home buyers, all that good stuff. So happy to see the cap lifted, and we still have some capital funding, but we'll continue to fund the land banks so they can continue to do their great work.
But because of sort of the bang for your buck you can get with a land bank, I see an argument to be made that we should be leaning on them as much as possible. And I wonder, from your perspective, are we maximizing what we can get out of the land banks, or is there some room for additional capacity there? Are there land banks who, hey, give us a few extra bucks and we could do even more?
I think that's a great conversation. I mean, the lifting of the cap, I think we are at 31 out of 35. So to your point, they do kind of form organically and are not sort of like a state-directed kind of creation. And we just are really sort of operating to support them. And maybe they're not needed everywhere because it's really about where there is, tax foreclosed property or a lot of like vacant and abandoned. So I think they have to come out of a place where there is a fair amount of distress in the housing market.
Missing teeth.
Yeah, not every community needs a land bank. So I don't know. I would say I'm sure that will sort of continue to grow, but we've had great success so far.
Finally, you've gone through this entire interview. You've referred to no notes while I've had to work through my Word document here, and you've been throwing numbers at me, referring to laws. You could be making it all up. I wouldn't know. I don't work for, the Real Deal or something like that. And this isn't the first time you do this. Your budget testimony, you're flying off with numbers. And again, hopefully it's all real. How are you doing that? Is this like a skill that you have always had? Do you just practice? Do you prepare? Where does this come from?
I love what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this work for a very long time. And I think when you work in housing over a period of time, you become very familiar with it. You become very familiar with the people who do it. You become very familiar with like the buildings and what they are, and things come up. And then I remember like, I worked on that like a long time ago, and I have like a memory for what that thing is. So part of it is just, I think, being in this work for a very long time and working very 360 at the state level has broadened that even to sort of new mayors, new electeds, new cities. I think it just comes down to like, I really love what I do. I feel very privileged to be able to do this work. I love being able to impact people's lives. I was at a ribbon cutting last week, and a man got up who said he had been incarcerated for 6 years, had gotten out, and for about 18 months he was homeless and living on the street, and it was really hard to like get his life together. He didn't really have a safe place. He felt safe in a home, and he had gotten a apartment in this building, and then they had offered him a job as a maintenance person. He had reconnected with his son, and his son had a grandchild. I was like, in very teary. I was speaking next, and a little like, gosh, I wish I was not speaking quite next. So the day that I don't get choked up when someone tells me how impactful the work is that I do is the day that I will stop doing this, but not one day short of that.
Well, I feel weird saying this after your sentimental and earnest response to that. Are there other aspects of your life then where this just doesn't translate, and you're like, you forget your spouse's name, you don't know where you live? I mean, or does this apply everywhere?
I think I'm a little bit of a type, maybe. Okay. I say to people, if I have 100 things to do, I can do 110. If I have like 5 things to do, I can do 1. Like I thrive on the volume. So.
Well, we've been speaking with RuthAnne Visnauskas. She's the Commissioner for the State Homes and Community Renewal. Commissioner, thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks for having me.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided in part by the Lawsuit Reform Alliance of New York. Fraud and lawsuit abuse impact car insurance costs for New Yorkers. Reforms are being proposed to mitigate their impact. Information on these reforms is available at keepnewyorkaffordable.org.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.